being so on time, but just in case, we're going to give folks until about 3 minutes after or so to come through. In the meantime, though, I'm so excited about how many people are here. If folks want to just take some time to go into the chat and introduce yourselves, you can maybe share your name, your location, and maybe like what brought you to join us today, whether that's the person who told you to come, don't worry about what the topic is, just come through, or whether that is your job, or whether that is just your love for someone who's obsessed with democracy and you wanting to be a kind person coming into December and coming to the holidays and hear what they're always babbling about. Welcome. Hey, everybody, as folks keep joining in, I'm just going to keep repeating that we are recording our conversation today. Just a heads up that this is going to be recorded, but shared kind of internally to the folks who are invited in and maybe weren't able to make it, shared via email. As folks are coming in, keep introducing yourselves in the chat, your name, your location, and what brought you to join us today. And we're going to get started in maybe like a minute or two. Or maybe once I see the waiting room has emptied out. This is awesome. I'm really happy to see some like familiar faces, but also really excited by how many names I do not recognize, which is always really exciting in these spaces. So excited to meet some of y'all and to see some of y'all again. So it would have been a good time to like play some welcome music, right? We could have like really gotten into the zone together. Okay.
You're doing great, Rahel. I love the band. Continuing to welcome folks. Good to see everybody here this morning. Thank you for coming. Or this afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yes. Okay. I think we are approaching critical mass, so I'm probably going to get us started in just a minute here as folks keep making their way in to the virtual room. Just one more time. Note that we are recording and that the recording will be shared out with folks, and then an invitation to introduce yourself in the chat. Check out the chat, get to know other folks who are here as well. Maybe share your name, your location, and what brought you in today. And I think that, we've hit 4 after, we're approaching 5. Maybe we can get started. Beautiful. Who has the slides?
I do. 1 second.
Oh no. And Jane, I think Jane, Justin, I think y'all can also let people in through the waiting room. We have a couple co-hosts. A little teamwork, make the dream work. Yay. All right, y'all. Thank you again for joining us. One more last reminder that we are recording today. An invitation to keep introducing yourselves in the chat as you come in, sharing your name, your location, who invited you in. And with that, we can get started with Bright Spots in American Democracy. Thank you all so much for joining us. I really am, I don't want to say surprised, but I want to say I'm like really excited by how many of y'all came through and joined us. And I think some of it has to do with you like loving someone in this space, but I think some of it also has to do with how much dedication and excitement and energy there is around this topic and this desire to find the bright spots in American democracy. Next slide. As a heads up for today, we are going to be digging into the work of the Participatory Budgeting Project as well as Healthy Democracy. We'll start off with a little bit of an overview of why we've decided to come together today and why we felt like this was the time. We'll get to dive a little bit deeper into what civic assemblies are, what participatory budgeting is, as well as get a chance to hear from some of the folks who are deep in the work. You'll get like a minute or so to hear from folks from Healthy Democracy as well as from Participatory Budgeting Project. And then we'll end off with a bit of like a what's next, how you can get involved, how you can continue to be plugged in with our work, and how we want to end 2025 with y'all and enter 2026 with all of you as well. So yeah, once again, Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here. My name is Rahel Teka. I serve as the acting co-executive director of the Participatory Budgeting Project. On behalf of our entire team, as well as the team at Healthy Democracy, we are so grateful for your time. Thank you for having your breakfast with us, your lunch with us, whatever the case may be. And I promise we'll make it worth your while. We'll make it a fun one. We are, as I mentioned, I work for the Participatory Budgeting Project, which is an organization that supports folks across the US to learn about, advocate for, implement, and improve participatory budgeting and other participatory democracy practices. We are thrilled to be joined by our partners at Healthy Democracy, which is an organization that works to elevate the voices of everyday people through innovative civic assemblies, which is a process designed to bring new faces to public decision-making and build healthy democratic systems. We named this event Bright Spots in American Democracy for a very specific reason, right? I don't have to tell any of y'all that, distrust in government isn't new, but it's definitely at a crescendo at this moment. People know and are feeling at a core level that the systems meant to serve us are not working, that power is concentrated in the hands of a select few, in ways that are very obvious right now, and that our communities are being pushed out or erased or tokenized from the very decisions that impact us the most. Participatory democracy, though, asserts that the true role of governance is to ensure well-being for our communities, and that our voices and our power are central to a system that works. That's why we're here today, to shed a light on a bit of what's being built, to talk about the tangible, proven solutions that are currently creating new systems of trust and shifting power into the hands of the people. This work is vital and it's urgent for many reasons, but there are key 3 reasons that I'm going to talk about today. The first is that we need long-term solutions. This work is about systems change. We're not talking about a policy fix or a one-time project. We're talking about cultivating civic culture. A culture where people aren't just invited to the table every few years, maybe to vote or to voice opinions that are unheard, but a civic culture where people can see themselves as ongoing authors of their community's future. We're building an infrastructure for a real democracy that's responsive, that's relational, and that's resilient. That requires moving beyond reaction and investing in the patient, deep work of changing how democracy functions at its core. This means redefining civic engagement as civic power. Second, real change is built locally, person to person. Trust isn't built through big splashy headlines, abstract promises, ideas. It's built block by block, where neighbors can sit together, deliberate, and see their ideas turn into projects and real policies. This is where participatory democracy lives. This is where people are able to experience governance as a process that they are actively shaping, not as a distant bureaucracy or a distant system that's acting upon us. This local grounding is where values like equity and your voice become a lived reality. Even in moments like maybe we're experiencing right now, where systems have targeted our communities, local power has proven to be a lifeline. We've seen this proven, and we've seen this power proven time and again. When SNAP benefits were threatened, mutual aid networks lit up to feed our neighbors. I've seen it directly. I grew up here in the Twin Cities, where the current administration's targeting of Somali community with hateful rhetoric and a surge of ICE agents, the response has been immediate, with WhatsApp groups emerging, political action calls to elected officials, and in other instances of communities being targeted, we've also seen folks coming together and tapping into that local powerful impulse and giving lasting structure to that change. This is like a lot of what we do with participatory democracy, right? The real kind of meat and potatoes of civic assemblies and participatory budgeting work is to give that local impulse of care and community a lasting structure and direct public power. And that leads me to the third and most urgent point, which is that we are at an inflection point right now. We are in an existential battle for the very meaning of democracy. We are fighting this fight in a lot of different manners, right? The defensive fights are critical. We're protecting rights, we're safeguarding elections, we're defending our communities from threat, meeting material needs. But if that is all that we do, we risk winning some small battles and big battles while losing the vision for the future and coming out weakened. If we're not actively expanding and transforming how we govern and relate to one another, even if we win on the defense, we risk losing that vision for the future that we want. This is the moment where we must invest in these solutions, and we must build a foundation to transform democracy. And that means we need to double down on the tangible solutions that we've seen work and that we've seen people invest their time, their energy into. This is the moment to double down. In this next hour, we're going to move from the why into some of the how, right? This need to double down, this vision for the future, it is not some, distant abstract thing. It's something that's really happening that people are working towards every single day, and that we welcome you to be a part of, and that you might already be a part of. We welcome you to double down with the rest of us as well. So as we dig into some of the how, you'll get to hear about two powerful and complementary practices: participatory budgeting, or PB, which you'll hear shortened every once in a while, and civic assemblies. We'll share some real success stories, introduce you to some of the people who are making this happen every day, and we'll save some time for your questions as well at the end. Overall, our hope is that you'll leave here today feeling like you are informed, like you've learned some things, but also feeling inspired and energized and fired up and ready to join us, because the future that we're working towards isn't just possible, it's being built right now, and it's necessary. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Justin, who's going to take us down the road of healthy democracy.
Thanks so much, Rahel. Yeah, appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about civic assemblies, which are the flagship program of healthy democracy, our main sort of innovation that we do work in. Could I get the next slide, please? So as Rahel sort of mentioned, one of the big problems facing us right now is that we don't necessarily see ourselves in our government or our democracy. We're disconnected from that and kind of disaffected about government. And civic assemblies we see as a really important innovation in helping give people real power and really giving them a chance to sort of be directly involved in decision making and helping see that everyday people can be involved in the policymaking process. These innovations have been called different things over the years. Sometimes they're called citizens assemblies or citizen juries, sometimes policy juries. Ultimately, a civic assembly or similar kind of process is really about bringing together a group of residents of a community who are selected by democratic lottery, and they're demographically representative of their community. So bound to look like the demographics of the community that they're representing. And those folks come together to deliberate and collaborate on some chosen topic or specific problem that the community is facing. And ultimately, they form a set of policy recommendations that they deliver directly to their local government. So the assembly is empowered to say, this is the set of policy recommendations that we're making, and they deliver those directly to local government. And I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the specific things that we think set a civic assembly aside from, or set them apart from different kind of the way we typically do policymaking in this country. If I get the next slide, please. So the two main things that we think really set civic assemblies apart are the democratic lottery process that helps bring new voices in, and the in-depth deliberation that happens once the process begins. So the democratic lottery is a process that we typically run in a civic assembly, where we start with whatever communities that we're working with. We send out a bunch of invitations, sometimes postcards or letters that go to thousands of addresses that are randomly selected from the community that we're working with. So thousands of people get these invitations in the mail and say, your community is facing this problem, or there's this topic that needs to be addressed in the civic assembly. Would you like the chance to participate in the civic assembly? And those folks respond in some way through the mail or online to enter into a chance basically to be selected in the democratic lottery. And then we use a computer algorithm that's designed specifically for this purpose to help create a series of usually several hundred or like 1,000 in many cases, hypothetical panels, each of which would be representative of the community in different ways. So balanced across demographic variables, several different demographic variables to look like sort of a microcosm of the community. And then we use in a lot of cases actual bingo balls to randomly select one of those panels, each one of which would be representative of the community, but we use random selection to sort of give everybody an equal chance to be able to participate. Um, so we think this demographic, or sorry, demographic, it is demographic, but it's also democratic. This democratic lottery helps draw out new voices. It brings people in who are like, I've never really been to a county commission meeting or a city council meeting, or maybe I've been to one or two government meetings in my life, but I'm not really that like involved in politics or in government. Um, so it helps bring new voices in and create sort of a representative panel that is like a microcosm of the community, or like the city, basically a mini version of a city in one room. Um, Paired with that, we have other methods that we use to help reduce barriers to participation. So a lot of times people don't participate in these kinds of events because they may not have a lot of time, or maybe they need childcare or family care. They'd be They're maybe struggling to get to a meeting, like physically sort of get to a meeting. So we use things like stipends to pay people's time, cover people's time. We use transportation reimbursement to help people cover their transportation costs if they need it. We can reimburse people for family care assistance. So if somebody needs like a babysitter or a caregiver for a family member, we can help reimburse that. We provide meals during the process. All of these things sort of help incentivize people to come out and participate in this event that's really impactful for the community, and hopefully bring in new voices that are not typically included. And we found that that's really successful in helping bring out new voices to civic assemblies. The second big piece is that we think is really important is about the kind of in-depth deliberation that's happening within these processes. And this is something that we share with participatory budgeting, with the processes that PBP typically runs, where there's a lot of where there's a process where folks are deliberating over a long period of time on this topic. We think that this really changes the policymaking process pretty substantially. So it prioritizes giving people a lot of time to learn about an issue, to dive more deeply into the facts and sort of arguments around an issue, give them information from a broad range of sources. They're also empowered to ask for more information from other sources, or bring in sources maybe that they hadn't already heard from, as well as sort of setting up an environment where it's really about collaborating together to solve this community problem, and not about adversarial sort of relationships or kind of arguing and debate. If I get the next slide, please. So I want to talk next about a couple of recent sort of bright spots with respect to civic assemblies. There are a couple of examples here. The one on the left is from the Petaluma Fairgrounds Advisory Panel, which is a civic assembly that that Healthy Democracy ran in Petaluma, California, back in 2022. And This process was focused on repurposing the fairgrounds space in Petaluma, which was this like 55-acre space that was really beloved by the community, and the community was trying to figure out what should we do with sort of this space moving forward, and helping ensure it's really beneficial to the community. So this civic assembly met over several weeks in the spring and summer of 2022. The one really interesting thing about this is that the funding for the civic assembly included an element of it that was sort of post-assembly process, or sort of some flexibility for the delegates to the assembly to decide what they wanted to do with sort of a portion of their time. And so what they wound up doing in this case was setting up a design meeting with professional designers to help them sort of take the visions that had been generated from the Civic Assembly and help sort of visually represent those on maps of the space. So you can see this is actually a shot from one of those design meetings that happened after the fact, where people were kind of visualizing like, what are these different visions that the Civic Assembly sort of created and came up with, and how would those look sort of in the space, and how would those maybe be used in kind of different ways. So this was a really interesting, we think one of the longest processes, civic assembly processes in the United States to date. So they met over several weeks. Excuse me. The process here on the right, this is a more recent civic assembly that we ran called the Deschutes Civic Assembly on Youth Homelessness, which was in 2024 in Central Oregon, Deschutes County. Those of you who know a little bit about Oregon, this was held in Bend, which is in Deschutes County. Central Oregon and Bend specifically have a lot of issues with a large unhoused population and a lot of issues with youth homelessness. This is an issue that the community was really grappling with. And the Civic Assembly was designed to sort of to focus on this problem and help generate policy solutions, potential policy solutions for reducing and potentially ending youth homelessness in the region. One of the really interesting things about this process was that it was done in concert with a community organization that was called the Youth Action Board, that is a community group in Central Oregon that consists of current and former unhoused youth. And they were really instrumental in this process, and they sort of helped convene the Civic Assembly, and then they came and participated in the assembly as presenting sort of their lived experience of here are the issues that we ran into that led to us falling into homelessness, or here are the things that maybe helped when we were struggling with homelessness, and the ways that maybe the community members could think about potential solutions to those problems, grounded in kind of the lived experience of folks who deal with homelessness. In this case, I think this is a community member who's sort of presenting about some of the policy issues related to sort of statewide policy around homelessness in one of the kind of deliberation sessions that we had. Okay, next I want to talk about our most recent Civic Assembly. So if I get the next slide, please. This is the Hughes Civic Assembly in Fort Collins, Colorado. I was excited to see we've got Krista and Colin, who both served as delegates in the Civic Assembly in Fort Collins, which made history this year. I'll talk about that in just a second. But this Civic Assembly convened in the spring in Fort Collins over 2 weekends with a topic focused on the future of the former Hughes Stadium site, which was a college football stadium that was demolished and replaced with a football stadium elsewhere. It was Colorado State University's football stadium. So the site of the former stadium, this was a longstanding issue in the community that was really contentious, and there were sometimes really conflicting visions with what to do with this space. And the city was trying to figure out how do we make a path forward that's going to be the most beneficial for the community in the future, and sort of fit the bounds of the kind of legal restrictions on the use of the site. Ultimately, this panel of delegates met over 2 weekends to hear more about this issue and the prospective sort of like solutions and kind of land uses that can be that were possible for this site. And they developed a set of 22 recommendations that were supported by supermajority of the delegates to the assembly, and those were presented directly by delegates to the City Council of Fort Collins. One of the interesting things and what makes this such a historic civic assembly was that due to kind of the political context it was operating in, there was sort of a competing campaign for what to do with the site that was run by a group of citizens of Fort Collins. And the Civic Assembly's vision was kind of somewhat in keeping with some of what that group wanted, but not entirely. So this was more of a multi-use site vision that the Civic Assembly developed, and that was because of that kind of political context, the city council decided to put the Civic Assembly recommendations on the ballot for voters to decide, do we want to enact these into law? And we think that that was the first time this has happened in the United States where a civic assembly has led to a set of recommendations that go directly to voters on the ballot. And then voters in Fort Collins just last month made history and passed overwhelmingly the civic assembly recommendations, which is such an exciting moment. I'm so glad to see, and glad to see Colin and Krista here today too to share in that moment. So this is some of the recent sort of examples and recent kind of success stories from civic assemblies around the country. Again, to kind of like talk a little bit about other kinds of participatory democracy kinds of approaches and approaches using like thoughtful deliberation. I'm going to hand things off to Elizabeth from PBP to talk about some of their programs. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. Hi, everybody. I am Elizabeth Cruz. I'm the acting co-executive director at the Participatory Budgeting Project. And I'm here to talk about participatory budgeting. So next slide. So at PBP, we advocate for participatory democracy practices with local organizations. We build capacity for governments and local folks to be able to implement participatory democracy processes, and we shape the field of participatory democracy by doing evaluation, research, and tool creation to center lived experience and equity. Next slide, please. So what is participatory budgeting, which I'm going to say PB for short because it's a mouthful. So PB is a democratic process in which community members directly decide how to spend part of a public budget. Next slide. So how does it work? It's a very simple process where a group of people come together to call the steering committee. They design the process. They make decisions around who can vote, which communities are going to be targeted, what are the goals of the process, how are they going to reach those communities. It should be a representative of the community that they're serving and they're trying to reach. We've seen youth as young as 8 or having like absolutely no age restrictions on who can vote, and undocumented folks who are left out of traditional voting and electoral processes be able to participate in PB. Then the community brainstorms ideas. So sometimes there's a public event, sometimes it's an online forum. Usually it's a combination of both. So people will table or like host events or do an online event or online forum where they gather ideas from the community about how these funds should be spent. Then a group of people come together. They're called budget delegates or proposal developers come together. They take all those ideas and they turn them into proposals. So they vet them with the government agencies. They combine proposals, they sort through them, and they make proposals that go onto a ballot. And that ballot goes back out to the community for a vote, and then winning projects get funded. And then last but certainly not least is the evaluation of the process. So really determining if you got to the population of folks, the communities that you wanted to reach, and how you can do better with your process in the next cycle. So next slide, please. Where is PB happening? So PB started in 1989 in Porto Alegre, Brazil, through a workers' party movement that was coming through a period of government corruption, so they wanted to do things differently where they were. Since then, we've seen PB proliferate across the globe, and here in the U.S., you can see all over the United States, from Seattle to Nashville to Atlanta. All over the country, we've seen PB really grow over the past 13 or so years. Next slide. So what kinds of budgets can we use for participatory budgeting? Short answer, if you can spend it, you can allocate it using participatory budgeting. We've seen mostly city, county, state, and federal budgets. So we did a big campaign around ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act, that came out in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw several communities use participatory budgeting to really center the people that were most impacted by the pandemic and how those funds were spent. We see, city budgets mostly, LA and New York. Schools are a really exciting place where we see youth engaged in participatory budgeting. So a really amazing project-based learning for folks who learn civic engagement by doing it. Non-governmental sources. So we worked with a really great process in Denver with an organization called the Denver Health Foundation, who really wanted to center folks that were impacted by the opioid epidemic. That was just a beautiful process that we're able to allocate those funds on the things that were identified by the people that were most impacted. We see public agency budgets, discretionary funds of elected officials. That's how we got started in New York City and also in Chicago. City council members had a pot of money that they were able to put aside for PB and also police and carceral budgets to think of alternative ways that communities can create safety where they are. Next slide, please. Elements for successful PB. First, start with money that matters to the communities that you want to engage. If you want to engage young people, use funding for schools. I think you have to click it in the box. Thank you. Use funding for schools or youth programs or other things that will excite youth. Pick a pot of money that addresses key issues for marginalized communities. Also, grassroots leadership. Make sure that your process is led by people from the communities you want to engage. Set up a steering committee of local community members, groups that, especially groups that work with low-income people, people of color, and other communities that have been historically marginalized. Inclusive design. So make sure that you're designing your process to be inclusive and accessible. One of the great things about PB is that you can bring the process to where people already are. Hold meetings at convenient times, locations, food and childcare, live interpretation, translated materials. Make sure that you're really meeting people where they are. Fourth, if you do all these other steps, you still need to make an extra effort to focus your outreach to make sure that you're reaching folks that tend not to participate actively. And finally, during the process itself, we use equity criteria to help budget delegates evaluate from an equity lens. Here at PVP, we really try to focus on equity and make sure that a PV process is shifting power, not only money, but also shifting power, decision-making power to communities that have been historically left out. Next slide, please. Impacts. So why do we do this? Other than shifting the power, shifting the money to low-income communities and communities that have been left out, we find that these folks are more likely to participate in other forms of civic engagement. They're more likely to vote if they're eligible, or they're more likely to get involved in their community, being like going to a neighborhood association meeting, going to government meetings, really speaking out. Like it brings them into the process in a new way. We know it centers lived experiences in community decision making, so it's shifting power, shifting money again, and participants learn about public finances. That's kind of an opaque process, the way that it's normally done. So really learning how that process works, what are the levers of power, how can we make sure that we're getting money where it needs to go. Next slide. A couple of examples. So I really love talking about Grand Rapids. They were one of the communities that decided to use a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funding, to ensure that the folks who were most impacted by COVID had decided where the money was going to go. So they had a $2 million budget. They focused on 3 districts in their community. So it wasn't a citywide process. It was the 3 communities that were most historically underfunded and most impacted by COVID. So you can see some of the winning projects included youth affordable housing support, lead line removal, 24-hour childcare program for folks that work second and third shifts. So really community-focused projects using federal funding at a local level. Next slide. I want to talk about LA Repair. LA Repair was this very special process because it was a reparations-based process. It was really a new approach to public safety and investments in Black and Brown communities in LA. So they picked these repair zones based on a number of factors. You can kind of see them listed. But it was a really special process that we did over 2 years with local organizations and local groups, funded by the mayor's budget. Decided to fund it after some intensive advocacy by People's Budget LA and Reimagine LA. And that was an $8.5 million budget. And lastly, I just want to mention, I see some of our friends from New York City. Some exciting work in civic design that takes aspects of what Justin has already talked about with civic assemblies and also participatory budgeting. So what they have done is use some great aspects like sortition lottery for their borough assemblies and the deep deliberation that Justin talked about to create kind of a hybrid design that takes both aspects of civic assemblies and PB to really elevate their PB process in a new way. So we've kind of seen like different aspects of these designs. I'm very excited that the Hughes process used a public vote. That's an important piece of PB. So kind of seeing these different processes and how they can work together and build on each other to really create processes that people need where they are. And with that, next slide, I want to introduce you to some of the people that are on the ground every day in the field building the democracy that we need right now, both from Participatory Budgeting Project and Healthy Democracy, to talk about their work. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Edna Sandoval, who's doing some really amazing work in California, worked with the LA Repair Project, and also around the country on our technical assistance team. So Edna, please.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. My name is Edna Sandoval, and I work as a technical assistant manager here at the Participatory Budgeting Project. And along with my colleague, Kayla, who's like technical assistant, technical director. Michael, I see you're here, our former technical assistant director is also here. We get to work with cities, community organizations, we work with schools. We also work directly with grassroots organizers across the US, and we support them, we implement, we coach them into doing something that is very transformative. We shift the real decision-making power into the hands of the people who lives with the outcomes. So real money for real people. And participatory budgeting is not only a program or a cycle, it's an opportunity to make things differently, like my colleague Rahel mentioned at the beginning. It's a doorway for communities who have been ignored, marginalized, underfunded, or spoke about instead of with them. And, you know, when people, youth, immigrants, communities of color, they see their ideas become funded projects, something shifts in them, right? Because the things that are happening right now, we're going through a very hard, and we have a our heart is broken for everything that has happened. But when we get to see the projects being implemented, something changed, and people see that their voice matters, and they believe that their life experience can be a tool for change instead of a barrier. So I think that's something powerful that we get to experience with the communities, because they see democracy not as an abstract concept that can be, as something that is, keep people on the margins, something that is not very achievable, but they see as a tool that they can hold in their own hands and shape according to their own values. So, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for investing your time and investing, your energy in a future that can hold everybody, and a future that belongs to the people. And with that, I'll pass it to who's next? I lost the agenda. My bad. But we're good at implementing. It's just the agenda. I have so many tabs open.
And I think I'm next.
Isabel.
Right?
All right, I'll pass it to my colleague, Isabel Luciano.
Thanks, Edna. So hi everyone. I'm Isabel, and I'm the Director of Training and Curriculum Design at PBP. And my job is basically to develop the training, the tools, and the resources that help people across North America build participatory budgeting processes that really fit their community's needs. So I wanted to take a minute and share something that I'm really excited about for this year. Over the past couple of years, our team has been hard at work rewriting and redesigning the PB handbook. The original version was actually my first big project at PBP back in 2014. And it basically captured everything we know so that others could run PB, but we always dreamed of making it more accessible, more interactive, and easier to use. So this year, we finally got the chance to make that happen. Not only did we rewrite it to include the latest insights we've gathered, but we also worked with a designer to reimagine the handbook. We're testing it with folks doing PB in Rock Island, Illinois, to make sure it really works for the people that it's meant for. And in it, you'll find everything you need to design and run a PB process from start to finish, including templates that you can adapt to the unique goals of your own context. So it's truly been a labor of love, and we're really excited to release it in 2026. And so stay tuned for that. We'll share the details when it comes out. And yeah, with that, I want to pass it to our colleague, Petula.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Hi, everyone. So good to see you all here. I'm Petula Hanley, the Democracy Beyond Election Coalition Manager here at PBP. The coalition comprises of over 20 organizations nationwide. The DBE, Democracy Beyond Election Coalition Manager, and I will paraphrase going forward, has been in existence for approximately 4 to 5 years. And we are a nationwide coalition dedicated to participatory democracy rooted in community-led decision making, a real decision making power that is equitable, accessible, and significant. Our acting co-ED spoke earlier of the ARPA campaign, the community-led decision-making that use participatory budgeting process to spend the COVID money, as we would call it. Some of our other initiatives include hosting learning sessions, such as Civic Assemblies. So we had a Civic and Citizens Assembly learning session where we dug a little bit deeper. So we spent an entire 90 minutes talking about this particular topic, how it works, with or audience participations to answer some of the questions I'm seeing popping up in the chat. Besides Civics Assembly, we do learning session on other participatory processes such as participatory action research, ballot initiative, co-governance, participatory budgeting with a lens towards use participatory budgeting, legislative theater, and more. All of the practices used to expand public power over decision making. So simply put, I am responsible for bringing folks together to learn, to collaborate, and problem solve together, whether in person or virtually. I see some of our coalition members here and some new friends that we met in person at our learning exchange in New Jersey. In addition to planning and hosting the learning sessions, we work on case studies, we give presentations, not only virtually, but locally at universities and colleges, etc., all while building relationships in a meaningful way. So today's presentation is an example of some of the cross-collaborative work as a result of coalition building. And at this point, I'll pass it over to my colleague, the advocacy manager for New Jersey, Nisha Thompson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nisha Thompson. I'm the New Jersey Advocacy Manager for PBP. I'm in Jersey City, and I run the PB Seeds program along with Isabel that trains people in PB and PB advocacy. We have been able to train 35 people across 2 states and 3 cohorts, and they range from grassroots advocates to civil society to local government officials. And I am so proud to say that we have 2 new PB processes in New Jersey, one in Newark on youth and environmental sustainability, and one in Trenton on neighborhood food security. And we have 2 awesome projects. I see Cherie here, who was in my first cohort, who is going to start doing some work with participatory principles for library renovation. So I'm very excited at the incredible amount of energy that these cohorts have been able to create for PB in the state. For me, PB Seeds has been this incredible experience, this moving and captivating moment of watching people transform from people who love their communities to people who embrace participatory democracy fully and wholly. They come with some idea of PB or absolutely no idea of what PB is and leave so excited to bring these tools and this process to their communities that they love, that they want to see prosper and bring joy. And they want to bring these tools that we teach them to the people. I'm getting so much interest. People are always like, blah, blah, blah. Cherie told me to take this class, so I'm taking it, and that's the power of participatory democracy and participatory budgeting. And I just want to say that, I'm seeing the interest. I'm seeing it grow. I'm seeing people want this. They want to bring it. They want more information. They want to know how to do this process so well. And that is really inspiring. That's giving me a lot of hope. And I'm really, really proud and grateful to be a part of this community. And I'm going to pass it to Grace, I believe. Thank you
Yes,
all.
hello. My name is Grace Taylor. I am one of 4 co-directors at Healthy Democracy. We have a flat organizational structure, so are trying to live our democratic values inside of our organization as well as out in the world. Besides doing the organizational back end and financial management stuff for our organization, I also am the first person that a delegate would talk to when they've been selected for one of our processes. I'm the person who would give them a phone call or send them an email and say, welcome, we're so glad you can come, and to find out what their needs are so they can participate more fully in the process. Are there accessibility needs? Are there language needs? Are there dietary preferences? So I'm going to take in all that information and help design the logistics and the details of our organizing so that we can make sure everybody is best situated to participate fully. I will help with things like reimbursements for childcare and transportation, and making name tags for everybody, and it basically handling all the details, and the planning and the implementation so that the delegates can focus entirely on their decision-making process and learning together, and so that our programs team can focus on holding that conversation fully. So that's a nutshell of what I do, and we'll pass it on then to Lauren.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren. I'm a program director and co-executive director at Healthy Democracy. I love this work because I very much believe in people and have seen how people are capable of remarkable things when they come together with an open mind in pursuit of a common goal. I've been with Healthy Democracy for about 1.5 years, and in that time, I've helped implement and moderate the Deschutes Civic Assembly on youth homelessness and the Hughes Civic Assembly in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hello to Colin and Krista. I'm really glad that you're here. And as a small staff, there's 4 of us. We wear a lot of hats. As a program director, as one of 3 program directors, we're largely responsible for doing outreach and implementation for all of our programs, and that includes civic assemblies, training, capacity building, civic education, and field building. And when not working on programs, I spend a good amount of time working on communications, fundraising, grant writing, and strategic planning, and with kind of an umbrella focus on project management across all of our programs and projects, creating tools and systems to simplify and streamline our work. I will pass it off to Justin.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I had a little bit of a description of my job, but I think in the interest of time, I'm gonna just cut some of that off because Lauren and I have very similar jobs. Basically, I'm a program co-director at Healthy Democracy, and a lot of my work basically falls into the 3 main kind of categories of advocating for civic assemblies or encouraging communities to adopt these processes, preparing for and designing our assemblies once we've started working with a specific community, and then the actual implementation of the assemblies. And one way, like one area that I wanted to highlight that I've helped lead is working with the folks who we bring in who are the moderators of the small groups. So a lot of times the civic assembly is something like 20 or 30 delegates who come together in a large group setting. So everybody kind of talking, but then a lot of work gets done when we break people up into small groups of say 4 to 6. And we work with usually a team of moderators who help kind of facilitate those conversations at the small group level. And I've helped kind of lead those groups in our last couple of processes, which has been amazing to see. So with that, I'll hand it off to Lynn, who's going to do a brief introduction and then kind of bring us home. Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Justin. Hey, everybody. I'm Lynn Davis. I've been at HD for about 9.5 years. I've co-designed and coordinated about 15 civic assemblies, and I also advise local governments on how to incorporate democratic innovations, and I'm an advocate and speaker on assemblies. By the way, please let us know if we can speak to your community group. We'd love to. What I'm most passionate about, though, is structural reforms. For example, we have a design for a series of assemblies that would write ballot measures from scratch to do what the initiative system was created to do. That is, to give everyday people, not just people with money, the power to create potential laws and send them to their fellow voters. I'm going to take us toward the end with a few thoughts about why we think this matters. You've heard us talk a lot about two, among many, hopeful innovations for our democracy. But you might very reasonably be asking yourself, how can we put energy into the long term, into new ideas, when we have such immediate threats to our existing system all around us? And don't get me wrong, we're well aware and concerned about the basics of our democracy, standing up for the rights in our Constitution, making sure we have a fair judicial system, supporting investigative journalism, pushing election reforms like ranked choice voting and campaign finance. These and many other things are all essential for us to do. But that's not the whole picture. There are troubles even further down at the core of our politics, which need as much, at least as much attention as strengthening what's at the surface. For example, let's imagine for a moment that all of the major election reforms proposed in recent years are successful. What would that look like? Well, we sort of know what that looks like. It looks like Australia, where they've been using ranked choice voting for over 100 years. They've got proportional representation and sane campaign finance laws and independent redistricting. And yet, according to a Pew study a few years ago, a whopping 48% of Australians still believe that their political system either needs major changes or needs to be completely reformed. Bolstering our current system is vital, but it's not enough. It helps us play the game more fairly, but it does not change the game fundamentally. Relying on elections to be our democracy isn't the only way. There has to be a better way. Among the most fundamental of all our troubles is this: we are not really involved. 99% of us will never run for office of any kind, and most of us don't participate in any other way in politics either. And who can blame us? The politics we're familiar with are dirty and mean and clinically bad for our mental health. And for those of us who do brave politics, there's always that nagging question: am I having any impact? As it is, we have to fight tooth and nail for our voices to be heard, let alone for any action to happen. I imagine most of you in this room are, like us, more involved than average, to say the least. Maybe you sit on a neighborhood board or write letters or show up at town halls. Yeah, me too. And yet I can show up on Zoom for 2 minutes, but there is no part of our system where I am ever an essential part of the policymaking process, where I don't have to fight for it, where the system is designed from the ground up to ensure that my voice matters, not because I'm the loudest or the richest, or even because I've fought the hardest, but simply because I'm a human being and I live here and I matter. Our democracy needs to be filled with processes that are designed to ensure that we are in them and that we matter. But it's not. The reality is virtually none of us in this room even will ever be deeply involved in any policy decision that affects us in any genuinely powerful way in our entire lives. Think about that. That's bonkers. That's not okay in a democracy. There has to be a better way. Now, there's no way that we can all be involved in every public decision. We don't want to be. But what if all of us had powerful roles in some of the decisions that affected us at some points in our lives, and that we knew that people just like us were helping to govern us when we didn't? When we have public processes that are controlled from the bottom up, that support us and respect us as decision makers, that give us tangible ownership and power, when we have well-designed democratic processes, we see that people from all walks of life are capable of extraordinary feats, of problem solving that seems like it should be impossible in our zero-sum political world. We also see the game begin to be changed fundamentally. Where participatory governance happens, people demand better representation, more opportunities, more out of their elected officials, and a more deliberate democracy throughout. And most importantly, we see people believing that they are an important political force. And it's not just those who directly participate either. A 2020 study in Oregon found that members of the public who simply knew that a civic assembly had existed, for example, saw a statistically significant increase in feelings of political agency. When we see people just like us doing important political work, we start to believe that we could do it too, and we can. People in general are fed up, have been for a while. Across the political spectrum, it's arguably the one thing we can all reliably agree upon. In that same Pew study I mentioned at the top, an incredible 85% of US respondents said that our political system either needs major changes or needs to be completely reformed. Yes, we need to stand up for the democracy we have. And yes, we also need the Band-Aid fixes, 100%. But we will not be satisfied by mere repairs. We also need to build ourselves new democratic homes. And there is a better way. Democracy that is not just making decisions for the people, but that is actually composed of the people and run by the people. Thanks so much for spending your time with us today. I hope you'll join us, and I'll pass it to my colleague Jane.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I'm so energized hearing you all talk about your work, which I get to do every day. So I'm Jane DeRoni. I am the fundraiser for PBP. It's my job to make sure that we all have the resources that we need to do this work. So obviously, I'm here to ask you for money. Lauren is putting up the slide again. We have a QR code. Lauren, could you also put the link in the chat so that people can donate? But I know that a lot of you support us already. PBP and Healthy Democracy have lots of partners on the call. That looking at the chat has been so amazing, all the wisdom that has been in there. And I know you all work with us in a bunch of different ways. So thank you as always for all of the work that you do. For those of you who are new to this, we would love for you to get more involved and to stay in touch. Our websites are on the slide. You can go there to learn more about what we do and where, sign up for our newsletters. There are lots of further resources about the movement we're in to build a democracy that works better for all of us. Look for us on social media, follow us, like our stuff. We need as many voices as we can get calling for more people power, and we would love to see you engage with us in all the ways that we're out in the world. We will put all of these links in a follow-up email along with the recording and the slides, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, the other way that you can support us is by donating. So if you're looking around, which I assume you are, like I am, and feeling like we need to do better, I need to do better, this is one thing that you can do. You can support this kind of ground up democracy. It's not the only thing, as Lynn mentioned, but you showed up today to learn, and that is a really big thing. And I thank you for it. I hope that you've seen some of the good work that we're doing, the ways that we are working every day to make the system better. So if it feels like that matters to you, and if giving money is a way that you're able to show that it matters, please donate an amount that feels significant to you. We would all really appreciate it. All of the donations today will be split equally between Healthy Democracy and PBP because we are in this together. And I want to thank you for being in it with us in whatever way you can. We don't have as much time left as I had hoped for questions. I know that folks have been really great about answering questions in the chat. Lauren has been focusing on questions. Are there any other questions that we can address in the next couple of minutes? And if we are able to if anyone's able to stay late, we can certainly do that to answer more questions. Lauren, have you seen one in particular that is popping out at you?
I passed this off to Grace so I could focus on a couple other things.
Okay, Grace. Yes, sorry, Grace. Is there a question that you would...
What did you ask, Jane? Sorry.
If there's a question that's coming to the fore that we could address in our last couple of minutes.
There are some really wonderful questions. We've been asked, how are these paid for? How do you get your list of community members? How does Civic Assemblies actually get their opinions acted upon by local government? What are some tools that are used in session to give data and information? So good questions about how does information come into those decision-making processes, and how do we decide what information to trust? So those are the top questions that I'm seeing here.
Thank you. And thank you for all the questions, those who asked them. We're obviously not going to get to all of that in the next, I think, 30 seconds that we have. I know people start to hop, so I'm going to give one last thank you if you need to go. But I can certainly answer part of the question about how this stuff gets paid for. So at least in terms of participatory budgeting, one way is that a city will pay for it, pay for the process itself. Another way is that we get grant funding and funding from individuals like yourselves. Happy to go into more details about that if anybody is interested. the follow-up email will also have a way to get in touch with us. I know that there were folks who wanted to do that. Any other questions that you all have not gotten answered in the chat that you want to speak out right now before we sign off? And Lauren, if maybe you could take the slide down. As much as I hate to take down the link to donate, please continue to donate if you are called to do so. But if there are any other questions that
yeah, there were Jane. There were a couple of questions that came from Catherine. I see Catherine from one of our Deschutes Civic Assembly delegates is here in the call. Thank you for being here, Catherine. And had a question about funding for the Deschutes Civic Assembly. So that Civic Assembly was funded primarily by donors to Healthy Democracy and to foundations, a couple of different private foundations that supported that particular ballot measure. Catherine also raised a really kind of an interesting and thorny problem sometimes with these participatory processes, which is getting governments on board to hear and respond to and take action on the recommendations from the Civic Assembly. And she voiced in the chat, I think, a really important point that this was a little more challenging in the Deschutes County Assembly and in some of these processes when local governments are maybe not as directly involved in convening the assembly. Like they were in, say, Fort Collins, where the city council was and city staff were really heavily involved in that process and really hungry for input from this process. So I don't know if Jane or Rahel, if you guys want to talk about similar kind of challenges with basically getting these processes institutionalized. That's a kind of thorny problem that a lot of us in the participatory governance space grapple with. And I appreciate Catherine's point.
I'm happy to kick us off, and then I might pass to other folks on my team, Elizabeth, Isabel, folks who have been deeply involved in New York or in Boston. I think that it's a great question, and I think it's one that is very timely right now, right? Like participatory budgeting is, about 35 years old in the world, 16 years old here in the US, and we're at this like really critical pivot point where we need to figure out how to move from a proven pilot, right, that does do all the things that we're saying it can do into something that is fundamental systems change and is incorporated into how we do budgeting. And it's thought of as like a change in how these decisions are made rather than an intervention in how these decisions are made, right? And so in New York City, the Civic Engagement Commission was put into place through another form of direct democracy, through a ballot initiative where the people of New York, after experiencing participatory budgeting at the council level for years, were like, hey, this is how decisions ought to be made. We need to do this citywide, and instituted an office that would hold that process and be held accountable for that process, right? Years later, we also saw in Boston, another place where years of other smaller processes, including Youth Lead the Change, which is a youth-led and youth-centered participatory budgeting process, folks saw and experienced that level of participatory democracy and said, this should be how decisions are made. And we see the Office of Participatory Budgeting, which has been started up in Boston. Of course, these are all things that are in process, right, and need to be adjusted. We need to think about how much power these institutions have, how when we're doing this institutionalization, how we continue to grow power and build that power, rather than allowing it to be kind of a boxing in of these processes, right? How do we combine institutionalization as well as an expansion of how these processes are used, rather than it being an opportunity to set them to the side. But because we are so new into this, I think that we have these opportunities in other cities as well. Portland, Oregon, somebody mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great work happening to institutionalize, again, having been proven, right? We saw a youth process, youth voice, youth vote, where we saw really incredible projects be funded by young people, also came out of a lot of advocacy from ARPA and post-COVID. And we're seeing that. And then also in Cleveland, we saw a attempt to kind of write in participatory budgeting into the kind of process for the budget, right? For a specific portion, a percentage of the city's budget to always be allocated through participatory budgeting. That initiative lost by a very slim margin, and they're building power to come up again to think about other ways to institutionalize. Isabel, Elizabeth, is there anything you would add there? Or anybody else?
I think it covered a lot of it, Rahel. I wanted to double down on the Boston's Youth Leaders Change example because I think what's interesting there is that they make it part of the youth. It's like it's tied to youth employment program. And so it's part of the youth's job every single year to run PB, which I think is really cool and I think helps make it a yearly expectation. Um, and so you're not only getting like PBS civic engagement, you're getting that, but it's also their dedicated role in the city. Um, so that's an example I really like, but something that's not as streamlined in Cambridge, right next door to that, it's been happening every single year. I think for the past 10 years, maybe 11 now. And the budget office runs this PB process. So I think that's a really interesting model too. The fact that it's like the city's budget office, but they've just integrated participation into it. So I think those are my two examples that I'd love to like chat more on and see if that could be a way to like institutionalize it as well.
Thank you. We are over time and y'all are hanging out with us. I am going to put out one more call for burning questions before we wrap it up. Thank you for all of these resources in the chat. Thank you. I'm seeing more questions in the chat, but they seem to be answered. Will we have a similar opportunity to have the space in 2026? Based on all of the interest and all of the connections that have come through in the chat, I am starting to think about how do we keep this up? How do we keep this energy going and keep connecting people in this way? So stay tuned for further opportunities like that. I just want to thank you all for coming. Lynn?
Jane, if folks want to stick around longer, I'm happy to personally. There's a lot of really interesting questions in there.
Okay.
I don't know if you can keep the room open, but I'm happy to be here.
We are happy to keep the room open. Yeah.
And thank you to all of you who have been here through this last hour. It's so nice to see you.
It is really great to see all of the support and love. I'm gonna stop. I'll hang out for a few more minutes and then just duck out. But if y'all want to keep talking with Lynn or other folks from PBP, keep it going. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
I'm gonna stick around. I'll keep the room open, Lynn, so don't worry. You're not gonna be
Okay. Okay,
it's
sweet.
not gonna end all of a sudden.
No pressure to anyone. Thanks for being with us. I'll jump in on that last one, actually. We are talking about sort of institutionalization, how to force the sort of existing decision-making systems to pay attention to these kind of reforms. And PB has this great benefit of having a section of cash that is straight up just decided but through this process. In our assembly world, it's a mixture of things. It's often advisory. Often there's a memorandum signed with a local government or a contract, depending on how it's being funded, where the local government will agree to hear the results directly from the assembly and give detailed responses about why or why not they're doing these things. There's often also some follow-up mechanisms. But that's, kind of on the low end. On the higher end, there are permanent processes emerging in some places, abroad, so far not here, we wish, where there's a permanent body that sort of rotates partially on, on and off every so often, that has the ability to set its own agenda and work on a variety of different topics every year, and then put things directly to the elected government, if that's the way that decisions are being made, and follow up with them, sort of keep their feet to the fire over the course of forever, because they're there forever. But there's some systems I mentioned are designed for assemblies working on things that go directly to voters through the initiative system. There's an example in a city in Poland where you can demand an assembly by petition if you get enough signatures, and then on a topic, whatever topic you want, the government has to run it and fund it. And then the results of that, I think if they get to 80% support, go back to voters directly. So there are some much more sort of stronger systems like that can be there. Eric, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric. I work at Columbia, and I've worked with some folks doing this civic engagement stuff, civic assemblies, and I lead a lab there on community building. I actually wanted to follow up on a point that Catherine raised in the chat, and that is something that I've seen a lot in other projects that I've seen, which is greater awareness across the community, ways of if not transparency, then some ways of helping people to understand what's happening, how it's going on, and that sort of thing, which I think is a really important part of the legitimacy of these processes. So I'm curious to like get people's thoughts and even ideas. I mean, because I recognize that this is sort of a evolving process.
I'll let others respond as well, but I just wanted to acknowledge that that has been that an assembly is a sort of a one-time deal. And what we're learning is that we need groundwork laid beforehand. We need communications resources throughout the process. We need follow-up afterwards. And we need to do it in the context of an ecosystem of democratic practice and civic infrastructure. And so that we're starting to see these sort of civic hubs around the country, people really trying to think about how to integrate different approaches with assemblies or PB and sort of how to build them along with local existing resources. But it is an important question that we're grappling with.
Cool. I love that idea. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, there's a number of folks working on this kind of civic hub idea in a variety of ways, but in any case, sort of an ecosystem. I think that, this has been a push in the past to spend a substantial amount of the money straight, on media, and yeah, that's great. But I'm not convinced necessarily that that's the best use of cash in the long term to do traditional media, sort of exclusively and put, substantial money there. First of all, the process itself needs to be good quality for it to have any lasting impact. So there does it, that's sort of typically what is taking most of the money, and rightly so. But this sort of, grassroots kind of preceding and after the assembly kind of organized, classic organizing stuff, I think is really where the best chance and there's a bunch of different interesting designs around that, especially integrating schools. PB's been a leader in that. But some of the assembly folks in the New York area, in fact, have also been leaders in our world on that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra, Brooklyn based. I'm really interested just as a citizen to get more PB and assemblies. And I'm working on a podcast that will focus on flood resilience and using an assembly for that here in Brooklyn. And kind of feel like thematically tied to Eric's question and kind of a question of the group is, are there examples of assemblies where there's been like a private public fund established before the process, given that, at the end of the day, we're only going in the next couple of years in the US see government budgets shrink. And when we think about insurance companies, foundations, private sector, like they have a lot of interest depending on what the assembly is focused on. And I work in public policy, and so I know, one of the challenges is always implementation. So just curious, private public fund before the process starts.
I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, this is sort of one of the holy grails. I feel like there's a number of people that have proposed this in Canada and the US. It doesn't exist yet at a national level, but there's a group called the Democracy Funders Network that is sort of an maybe early consortium. Joe Matthews can speak to that a little bit of major funders. These are big foundations, not a public-private group though. And in many of these projects, they're a public-private combination. Most of our civic assemblies in the last 6 years or so have been a couple of them have been fully privately funded, like in Central Oregon, but Fort Collins or Petaluma or yeah, earlier ones in Oregon have all been a mix, but it's been on a project by project basis, which is hard. That's not what you're asking about. And it would be great if we could, if we used to have a National Endowment for Democracy at the national level that funded democracy programs in other countries, as you may know. And it'd be great if we had one of those for the US, inside here,
Yeah,
inside this mad country.
thank you. I'll have to look up the Democracy Funds Network. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Democracy Funders Network. I mean, the other people that have talked about this are Ramin Sarabi at the American Public Trust, and let's see who else has been talking about that. I'll think of it. I'll put it in the chat if I remember.
I'm happy to introduce you to Ramin over email, Cassandra, if you want. We work with Ramin quite closely on a lot of things. So he was heavily involved in the Colorado project, Fort Collins. Yeah.
I would greatly appreciate this. And I apologize. I joined late. Lynn, where are you based? Are you East Coast, New York?
Portland, Oregon. Yeah, all of us at HD are in Oregon or Washington right now, as of right now.
My most favorite political project I worked on was in Oregon. You guys are a special state.
Oh, shucks.
Cassandra, I'll start that email right now, introducing you to Ramin. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
I haven't looked back in the chat, but if anybody else wants to raise a hand or jump in, feel free.
I have a question, and this is for Eric and Raquel and others in the New York kind of ecosystem. So I know Brad Lander suggested an assembly as part of his housing platform. Obviously, he's not going to be part of the new administration. I believe CUNY is going to be working on like a waste management focused assembly that's kind of part of the school. Is there anything bubbling up in New York City around other assemblies? I don't know, Erickson, like you're at Columbia, if you're hearing anything. I was hoping that thread would like pull into the Mamdani administration.
I'm going to throw a couple emails in chat. Our contacts in New York, and they know sort of everything that's happening or not happening or promised, assembly wise. There's been work. I mean, I'm in the Eric Adams administration. There was an office that we were working with pretty closely at one point about working on an assembly around migration related issues, and at a different point around some other issue that I'm forgetting. The Civic Engagement Commission also is really active in our world, and they sort of cross the PB assembly line and are looking for opportunities, particularly in budgeting as well. Most recently, I heard them talk about sort of combining PB and assemblies together, which is really exciting. I'll put a few emails in chat.
Cool, thank you. And I know Benjamin's awesome.
Oh yeah, great.
Forrester Foster and Philip are also awesome.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh yeah, I already connected her with Forrest and Phil, Lynn, if that's who you were going to suggest.
All right, great. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
awesome.
Justin is the through line of why I'm getting to be part of today's conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, and go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to share more information about the CUNY project. I think that Forrest has been quite involved with that, and I think that it's going to be an interesting model. I think that a part of what is, in my opinion, right, just like as a New Yorker, maybe like less so than as a acting committee of PVP, is that there's a bit of a need to like think through what the muscle and the teeth of the results of a civic assembly is in the New York context, especially in a place where, I think that a part of how the civic, like I mentioned earlier, like about how the Civic Engagement Commission was able to exist was through another form of, direct democracy after quite a bit of evidence of PB and its function. And I think that, in my personal opinion, as like a New Yorker, but also as a person who's like involved in participatory democracy, is that there is kind of I'm really excited about what's happening with CUNY because I think that there is sort of a need for that as a model of like what is possible. Also, like what does that kind of back and forth, that negotiation between not overpromising, right? Like that, and what does that? What is the result of this assembly in terms of like actual change, in terms of like recommendation versus action, policy versus commitment to like review, or like what comes next after the assembly. Is a lot of what's going to be, I think, really exciting coming out of the CUNY process in terms of it becoming like politically viable, in my opinion, citywide. But really amazing work happening that Forrest and Philip and other folks in that ecosystem have been like really pushing forward in an amazing way.
Awesome. Yeah, I love those folks as well. Yeah, I've heard some optimistic signs from various people in the city agencies with respect to what could happen under the new mayoral administration. I have a catch-up chat with Benjamin actually in about an hour to start planning for next year's work. So we'll kind of see where that goes.
I love this too because it's reminding me how important just like getting together with folks is, because like Cassandra, you came to the learning exchange and got to like talk with Hill like in a very specific way. So I'm just like, yeah, I hope that we're able to do a bigger learning exchange, maybe find somewhere in between New Jersey and Oregon, and maybe Healthy Democracy and PvP can do like a big learning exchange. That's the dream that I'm manifesting out there. Well, this feels like maybe as good of a place as any to kind of like thank you all for staying longer. Thank you, Lynn, for like being like, hey, like time is up to us. Let's stay as long as we need to for a bit. Yeah, and all of you who hung out with us, like thank you so much. There's going to be a lot of follow-up coming through. We have so many amazing questions in the chat that like if we really wanted to, we could just go through and talk through them all. I think that there's going to be a lot of content coming out of this. So just keep an eye out in your emails. We're going to go through all these chats and everything like that and send out resources, the recording, next steps, and opportunities for folks to stay in touch with us, but also stay in touch with each other, and keep these conversations going. Lynn, is there anything you want to add before we wrap it
I
up?
don't think so. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yay. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, y'all. Really appreciate y'all again. Talk
All
soon.
right, cheers.
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Diane, I'm glad you made it.